Hi, I'm Jack, and this is the second video in a series that will show you how a novice DIYer can build their own fitted wardrobe. In this video, we're going to focus on framework and shelving. If you've not seen the video about planning, it's probably worth giving that a watch first. If you're a more confident DIYer and fancy making a wardrobe like a fitted furniture maker would, then make sure you watch this other series of videos as well, which guides you through some of the more complex techniques for a really high-end finish. I'll add a link to these videos once I've got round to editing them. You can find links to all the tools and materials that I've used in this video below. Before launching into the build process, I think it's worth taking some time to talk more about materials. The structure of this wardrobe is made entirely out of 63 by 38mm studwork, which is normally used for partition walls. It's sometimes called CLS, and it's perfect for a wardrobe framework as it's inexpensive, pre-planed so it's smooth, the corners are rounded over, and it also paints and cuts really well. The number you'll need will vary on your design, but to give you an idea, for this 6-door wardrobe I used 18 lengths of 2.4 m CLS. At just under £3.50 a length, the whole framework costs 62 quid. For the shelves you've got a couple of options. Melamine, which is sometimes called furniture board, which is essentially chipboard wrapped in a veneer. One benefit of melamine is that it doesn't need painting, but personally I find that it looks quite cheap. So I always make my shelves out of 18mm thick MDF. Okay, so now we're on to setting out. It's crucially important that you mark the position of your framework before you start screwing it into the floor, walls and ceilings. I stick down masking tape at the rough position of the front of the framework, and then use a pen tool to mark out exactly where the front edge of the framework is going to sit. If I assume you've gone for a depth of 60cm, take that measurement of the back wall at the far left hand side and the far right hand side of where the wardrobe will be. You then need to join these up with a line, which will define where the front of your framework is going to be positioned. A 6-foot spirit level is going to come in handy for so many jobs in this project, including marking straight lines across from one point to another. Once I've made those marks on the floor, I move on to the wall. A laser level is also invaluable for this process, as it helps to align the position of the framework across the whole space. You can get one for under 30 quid. Soon enough you'll have marked out the positions of all your front timbers so you can finally get measuring and cutting. So grab your first piece of CLS and cut it to length on your mitre saw. If you don't have space for a workbench, then this temporary one that I set up when I'm on site is brilliant. Here's a link to a video that shows you what you need to make your own. I like to start with the framework that sits on the floor and then move up onto the walls before doing the ceiling. It's really important to make sure that the horizontal pieces are level and that the uprights are plumb. You'll see why in the final touches video. More often than not you'll find that the floor is not level, and so your framework won't be either. This is where shims come in, which are sometimes called packers. You can get these in multi-packs of different sizes, which are really handy to help you level up your framework. Make sure that you've got packers at about every 50cm. Then drill pilot holes and screw down, being careful that the screws don't go more than 20mm into the floor, which should safely avoid hitting any pipes or cables. If you're not familiar with what pilot holes are, they're drilled so that when it comes to driving screws in you don't split the wood. You don't always need to drill pilot holes before screwing, but if you're in any doubt you might as well do it. For the right hand side of this wardrobe, I was fixing into a stud wall, so it was really important to find the location of those studs so that I could fix the framework into them. Fixing into plasterboard just wouldn't give a strong enough hold, especially when it's supporting the weight of a 2-metre tall door. You can find the rough location of studs by giving the wall a good tap. You'll notice that the wall feels a bit more solid when there's a stud behind it. Once you've marked the rough position of the wall studs, use a detector to make sure that you're not going to drill through any cables or pipes. You don't have to check for cables or pipes, but it's not worth taking the risk in my opinion. Grab your combi drill and a small masonry bit, and drill a series of horizontal lines very close to each other to work out exactly where the left hand side and right hand side of the stud are, which will give you the centre point, which is where you'll screw your framework into. Make sure that you drill your holes where you know there's going to be a cross section of timber, so that they won't be on show. Studs are usually centred at about 40cm, although in some new builds I think that can go up to 60cm. Once you've got the positions of your two studs marked, use your long spirit level or a laser level to track its location up the wall. After cutting some CLS that will be horizontally stuck onto the stud wall, drill pilot holes and partly put your screws in, so that when you offer the CLS up to the wall it's just a case of screwing it home. I didn't drill pilot holes here, but I should have because I split some of the wood. These horizontal lengths of CLS provide a few purposes. Firstly, they give you a really strong foundation for your uprights to be screwed into. They're much stronger than if you just screwed an upright straight into the plasterboard wall. Secondly, they're also there to support shelves and rails. The last reason for having them is to pack out the right hand side upright, which is what the door will be fixed into. You want at least 5 cm worth of profile to the sides of the wardrobes to make sure the doors can open fully. When it gets to the ceiling, it's good to have an extra pair of hands if possible, as it can get quite awkward to support the piece of timber while screwing it in place. Just like with the wall on the right hand side, this ceiling is made out of plasterboard, so it can't support a massive amount of weight. However, the difference here is that the ceiling will only be supporting a very small weight. The standard plasterboard fixing should be fine for this job. I use Fisher Duo power plugs, as you can use them in both solid walls and plasterboard. Hold your cut piece of CLS up to the ceiling and screw through it just to mark where you need to position the plug. Then once you put the CLS down, use a masonry bit to drill through the plasterboard. The plugs I'm using here are 6mm. Tap your plug into the hole with a hammer. I'm sure it'll be absolutely fine just to use plugs to fix the CLS, but for a belt and braces approach, I added some grab adhesive, which also gives you an extra hand while screwing in place. Next, you want to drive your screws into the wood, stopping just short of fully driving them in. I think I was using 70 by 5mm screws for this. Finish the last few twists by hand to make sure that you don't over tighten the screws in the plugs. This could dramatically reduce the hold, so always tighten the last bit by hand when you can. You can now fix your upright in place. Just like with the first piece of framework on the floor, you can use packers to make sure that this upright is perfectly plumb. Take your time over this stage because the door will be fixed to this upright, so it really does need to be dead vertical. You can see that things are starting to take shape now, although I haven't done the right upright by this point. Once you've got all the outer frame fixed in place, you can move on to the internal elements, and that's where pocket holes come in. Pocket holes are a really quick, discreet and strong way of butt jointing 2 bits of wood together. The way they work is that you clamp a piece of timber using a pocket hole jig, and then drill a hole diagonally into the side. The jig I'm using here costs around 70 quid, but you can get them a lot cheaper than that. Put your pocket screws in, and then drive into another piece of timber to fix them together. Pocket holes is the way that I fix pretty much all of the internal elements in place, including the uprights that the doors are hinged onto, and the shelf and rail supports too. For your uprights, first mark their position on the bottom piece of framework, and fix in place with a couple of pocket screws. Then you can use a spirit level to do the same for the top, again making sure that your upright is dead plumb. Pocket holes are quite discreet, but if you want to hide them you can use wood filler. It won't be long before you have all the uprights in place and it really starts looking like a wardrobe. If your design needs corresponding uprights at the back of the wardrobe, use something long and straight to mark the position of it, based off the position of the front upright. I used a long square here, but really all you need is something that's straight. I used pocket holes for this one to screw it straight down into the floor. And at the top, I added a short piece of CLS to pocket screw into. This upright felt a bit wobbly, so I also added a right angle bracket into the wall to give a bit of extra strength. Moving on to the horizontal lengths of CLS to support the shelves and the rails, I used a combination of a laser level and a spirit level to mark out their positions. Be really careful to mark out exactly where you're going to screw them in, so that you don't have headaches at a later stage. Then it's just a case of more chopping and pocket holing, which by now you'll be a pro at. Depending on what your walls are like, you might find that sometimes you need a combination of pocket holes and wall plugs. That's well worth planning out beforehand, to make sure that you've always got an appropriate surface to screw into. Some of the shelves in this wardrobe have a span of just over 1 metre, so to help stop them sagging, I added a length of MDF at the back. Of course you could use CLS for this. The chimney breast that I was drilling into was made out of really hard brick, so I switched my combi drill into hammer mode to make sure that I could get through it. If you've got a lot of holes to drill into masonry, then an SDS drill would really be better for this. I used the same Fisher Duo plugs to fix these sections into the wall. Before you give your framework the seal of approval, make sure that you go around checking that everything's really secure. It's also worth double checking that everything's level and plumb, and that your door opening dimensions are exactly as you'd planned. Assuming you've planned well, the shelves are a really easy stage because it's pretty much just a case of sliding them in place and screwing them down, although there are a couple of extra jobs you've got to do before this. The edges of the MDF will be really sharp, so a quick hand sand with something like 120 grit paper or a chamfer with a router will sort that out. And to give the best paint finish on your MDF edges, apply some wood filler and sand it down before painting. I'll go through this process in more detail in the doors video. If you've got any sections of CLS that stick out, you can adjust the shelves with either a handsaw or a jigsaw. Once you've slid the shelves in place, screw them down from the top to stop them from wandering around. A final stage to add a bit more support to shelves, which is probably overkill, is to add a fix-it block to the back of the CLS upright to help make sure that heavy loads won't be an issue. A final tip for planning your shelves is to have them cut to around 5mm less deep than the space that you're sliding them into, just to make sure that you have a little bit of wiggle room and don't need to make adjustments. So there you go, that's the framework and shelving done, ready to receive the doors. While it's not the standard way to build a structure of a wardrobe, I've done this a few times now and it really does work, as long as you make sure that you take the time to plan the project properly first. The framework's super strong and will easily take plenty of weight. It's also incredibly affordable, with all the CLS framework and 18mm shelving for this project coming in at less than 100 quid. I reckon that most of you are probably doing a wardrobe that's smaller than this one, so that cost for you will be even lower. And yes, it may not look beautiful now, but once you've got the doors in and everything's painted, it'll look fantastic. On to the next video, where I'm going to show you how to make the doors and fit them.